And the Longboat Bridge washed away in 32, told to Palmetto, I mentioned. 1935, the Whitneys arrived. And they built some cottages. They looked all over Florida to find a nice place, and they found it. And they bought some property and built some cottages. And business wasn't very good because the cottages were $50 a week, and that was pretty high. But they survived and did pretty well. 1936 to 1943, we had a school with 17 students. We had a rough time getting it, but they hired a gal who had 5 children, and so that increased the number. So they got permission from Manatee County to have a school. 1939, dredging of beer can of the bay. The beer can starts eroding. Who owns it? Who owns it? Conrad versus the state. We're talking about Beer Can Island. Who owns it? Well, it turns out that they went all the way to the state. And Conrad, forget his name. Frank Conrad owned the land, and he didn't want to build anything on it. He didn't want to establish who owned the darn place. Who owned Beer Can Island? And it went to the state. And finally, the state came down with a ruling, yes, Mr. Conrad, you own it. But a Manatee County Commissioner said, no, he doesn't own it at all, we own it. Oh, really? Finally, Conrad said, oh, to heck with it. So it was then awarded to Manatee County, who owns it still. In 1941, there was a bridge scam. That was during the war. Some people decided that they were going to have they needed a bridge across Longboat Pass. They needed a bridge, needed it like the hucksters in, what was that movie? Doesn't matter. Well, we got to have a bridge. We got to build it today. Yes, sir, Ray. We're going to have a party. We're going to have a cookout. And we're going to have...
it was a big party.
Oh, it was a big party. It was so big, in fact, it was advertised. These people behind it were scam artists, they really were. They had jitterbug contest, barbecue, high wire, and believe it or not, this was in 41.
Melinda on the highway.
I think they had like a couple of thousand people or something.
No, 17,000 people attended
Holy,
this, believe it or not.
We haven't had anything like that since.
Well, I know it. Hell, we haven't had 17,000 people on Longboat Key.
Right.
And the newspapers, in the Sarasota paper, covered very well. And in one place they said yes, and it took about 3 days to get the cars out from the sand. Because in those days they had narrow rims.
Yeah, I guess. It
And,
got all
it was
stuck.
something. And this was a time also in 41 where the Shark Factory, with Dad Holbrook.
Well, you didn't finish about the scam artist.
Oh yeah, the scam artists. Well, they had all those things, and people attended, and it was a great success.
People bought
And they
bonds.
they bought stock in the new bridge that was going to be built, and everything was just fine. And the next day, the people were gone with all the money. So it was never built, and nobody will ever admit to having bought stock in that street, believe it or not. I've asked so many people that were around, and I suspect Gordon Whitney bought stock in it, but he never admitted it.
Well, Mother and Daddy sold the property where the bridge is now.
Is that right?
That was, what do you call it, like where the government takes your property and they say,
yeah.
we'll give
Eminent-
you so much money. Yeah.
Eminent domain.
Yeah, and it was a big argument. You know, Mother and Daddy said they didn't get enough money for it. But
Right? Did they ever get it?
Yeah, they got money, but not
Not enough.
what the
Not
real
nearly
value
enough.
of the land was.
So that was the end of Longboat Pass Bridge. And as a matter of fact, the foundations are still in view. One of them has been covered up within the last 2 years, but the other one is right near shore
Grecian.
on the south side.
Same place it's been all these years.
That's right.
Hasn't changed much.
Oh, that's marvelous. Well, let's go on. Oh, I'm talking about Dad Holbrook, the great shark. Dad Holbrook lived around here, right in the north end, someplace, and he was a very well-educated guy from Maine who came down here and decided, in retirement, I'm going to have some fun. I think I'll take some sharks. They got a couple of sharks and he said, hey, there's a market for these things. They're fins and all sorts of stuff.
The liver oil.
Yeah, the liver and the oil and the fins. And so he went into business. And he was catching sharks. I think he said got 3,000 over 6 feet. But one of them was a dilly. It was a great white shark. It was about 20 feet long. And no one will ever admit where they caught the shark except the guy who caught it, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Edgar Green.
Edgar Green, yeah. He worked for Dad Holbrook. He caught one, and he said later, all the newspapers, of course, and Gordon Whitney said, yeah, that shark was caught about 5 miles off Longboat Key. Edgar Green didn't say a word because it would ruin the tourist industry. So what he did was he told people quietly a few years later, actually, I caught this thing less than a mile offshore.
Well, I think it's about a half a mile, quarter
Half a
mile
mile
offshore,
offshore.
off Whitney Beach.
Yes, right off Whitney Beach. And if he'd said so, there would
Well,
go Whitney Beach.
I had the fortune of meeting Edgar Green with Kent Chetland.
Right.
And they were right outside of my screen porch, and Mother and friend and I were having coffee, and we said, recognize Kent. And we said, hey, Kent, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm establishing where that picture was taken of the great white shark. So I
Right.
got a chance to meet Edgar Green and to talk to Kent. And we said, well, where was it brought up? And he said, right where you're sitting. So right where my porch was
Right.
where they brought the shark up. And when you look at the picture, you can almost look across the bayou and recognize
Right.
that it was right there. And Edgar Green said at that time that the shark was 24 feet long. And I said,
That's
well,
a big fish.
I said, how did you know how long it was? He said, well, we didn't have a tape measure because we just didn't do that. But he said, I had a poling oar 18 feet. And Edgar was a big man. I mean, he was at least 6 feet tall.
Right.
And he said, I laid the poling oar down next to the shark, and I laid down next to the poling oar, and he said that was the length of the shark. And
Wow.
he said 18 feet plus 6 feet would be 24 feet. So I guess there's all kinds of ways of determining
And all
That's
kinds
a
things,
more
but
unique.
somebody, a personal witness, a first-hand
Right.
witness would be pretty credible.
Absolutely. And let's face it, the story about it has multiplied, I'm sure. So
But that was from the horse's mouth. That was the
you
man who
can't
caught
get
the
any more
shark.
accurate than that.
Yeah, well, it'll be
Right.
up for conjecture for years.
Well, let's see what happens. Well, we finished with the bridge scam, in which 17,000. Actually, the Saratoga newspaper has that in print. 17,000.
It's hard to imagine that.
Indeed. Then came World War II, and the Germans had submarines all over the place. They had them out of the Gulf, and we had quite a few scares. The Air Force had a target range right on Longboat Key. They would come from Sarasota, drop their bombs, or fire their guns and go out over the Gulf. And at least 3 airplanes were lost in the Gulf from this bombing.
And there's holes all back in the bay.
Oh yeah,
John Morrill, my professor at New College, told me, he says, you know where those holes are, how those holes formed? And I said, no, I never really thought about it, but how did they form? He says, the when they drop bombs.
yeah.
So
Where are these holes?
Off of Sister Key.
Really?
Yeah, there's just all these holes where they drop bombs, and
Sure.
then it gets deeper than seagrass grows.
Sure.
And so the seagrass never has reestablished there because it's like, 6 feet deep, and
Right.
the seagrass doesn't grow below 4 feet.
Right.
Well, they don't.
And so as a result, Longboat Key has quite a history of involvement in World War II. But we also had the Coast Guard here. They took over one of the motels.
The Albion Inn.
Yeah, well, no, this was on Longboat Key.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about
And
Cortez.
they had there's a movie incidentally called Sunday Dinner with a Soldier. It was John Hodiak, and I forget the other gal. It was made on Longboat Key, believe it or not.
Well, that would be fun to get that movie and show it.
We've got it. You've got it. Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen it.
Haven't? Oh, it's marvelous. It's in the collection. Anyway, it's all about a guy who's on a furlough, and he walks around, and finally he comes to Longboat Key, and a family there invites him in, and because
And he and the girl fall in love.
All right.
oh yes, it's a cute little movie,
Cool.
and they used the
We had
the
a devil
bus.
of a time getting it because those old movies aren't kept even.
They're not cataloged. We had
Well, I'd
all-
love to see it. I just haven't seen it in our
Good,
collection.
I'll look for it. And what was this? Well, anyway, that's World War II. Oh, the Coast Guard used to take. They had a motel on Longboat Key they stayed at. They drove people out, and the Coast Guard took over with dogs, and they walked the beach every night.
Right.
Yeah, north and south.
And they used to have a thing where they, advertised that the public needed to be on guard and
Oh, yes.
watch and keep their lights out.
Right,
No lights, and
One
then
night,
watch the
one
water.
Laura
night,
Whitney.
Laura Whitney told us that she got a call from Tampa saying, "Would you please watch out for the beach tonight between about 4 hours or so?" Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to. So she walks out on the beach, and sure enough, she sees a light. And she didn't know what to do, so she didn't do anything. And the light went out, and nothing happened. So she reported out to the Coast Guard. Yeah, that's right, good. I'm glad, that's fine. That's the submarine that was going to land there.
Wow.
Wow. So that's how close we came to having personal knowledge of World War II. Then in 1950, we had some of the problems on Longboat Key began to appear. We had no DDT. We're not supposed to use it. We had raccoons, we had rats, we had mosquitoes, we had roaches, and we had peacocks.
So it's the same.
Same as today.
Not the mosquitoes. You don't have mosquitoes like
We
they
still
do.
have
Oh, yeah.
mosquitoes,
Nothing
but not
like-
like that.
nothing
But
like
we
mosquitoes.
still have them.
Yeah.
Nothing like it.
And
And gnats.
the restaurant that used
Sand gnats.
the restaurant that's now what's her name? The big restaurant, the expensive restaurant.
Mar Vista?
No.
You're talking about the peppermint stick?
No.
The,
Anyway,
Euphemia Hay?
Lobert's.
or Euphemia Hay.
Euphemia
You're
Hay.
talking about
Right.
Euphemia
And
Hay.
Euphemia Hay is a very popular restaurant today, but it used to be known as Jory's Restaurant. And at Jory's Restaurant, the proprietors put some clothesline in the backyard and put some food out, and before you know it, they had a raccoon circus out there.
Well, they would put the leftover food out
Yeah.
for the coons, and then that was the entertainment.
It sure was. So as a matter of fact, it was so good that people would come from miles around to watch the raccoons and to eat the food, which is good. The only trouble was, after a couple of seasons, one of the raccoons had rabies, and that ended the raccoon problem.
Well, before that, they had Guy Pascal, who
Oh.
was the first mayor, had said that they had estimated that he had 150 raccoons at his house, and Mother said that they would go for parties, and they would have drinks and have dinner, and after dinner they would put the plates outside,
Right.
and then they would have after dinner drinks and watch the raccoons eat the food off the plates.
Oh boy.
So that was, and then the first police chief had what they called the raccoon circus in his backyard.
Well, really?
And he had a show where he had a number of raccoons. So this has been going on
For years.
for years.
Absolutely.
And, you know,
And
it's-
even today, except there's so many rules now that there are a lot fewer raccoons today than there were. But
well, they still have a lot of raccoons on the island.
Oh, yes.
They just